The call came just after noon on a Wednesday. I almost didn't answer. Unknown number, no voicemail. But something nudged me. Curiosity, maybe. Or habit. A woman on the other end introduced herself from the collections department of a private bank. She was polite, almost casual, asking why I'd missed the first installment on a loan I'd taken out 6 weeks earlier. Her tone assumed this was a routine mistake. Mine didn't. There was no loan. Not from that bank. Not for that amount. Not under any plan I'd applied for. I asked her to repeat the details. She read off my full legal name, my national ID, my current address, and then the loan amount, $48,000. My hand went cold around the phone. It wasn't a clerical error. Someone had done this deliberately, and whoever it was knew everything they needed to make it look like. That's when I stopped assuming this was a mistake and started treating it like betrayal. My name is Ethan Ward. I'm 32 years old, and I work as an IT systems auditor for a mid-sized firm. It's the kind of job most people would call boring, but I value it for the stability it brings. I've built my life around consistency, paying bills on time, checking reports twice, keeping a low profile. There's comfort in predictability. No surprises, no loose ends. I've never had a taste for chaos. I don't gamble. I don't borrow what I can't return. And I've worked hard to keep my credit clean, my record clear, and my name intact. Not for praise, but because I've seen what happens when people treat life like a game. I've spent years cleaning up other people's digital messes. I never imagined I'd have to clean up something like this. From inside my own home. Liam, my younger brother by 5 years, was always different. He wasn't reckless in the dramatic sense, more like casually impulsive. One month it was e-commerce, the next it was NFTs. There was always a plan, always. A pitch, always some friend who knew a guy. He meant well. At least I used to believe that. I'd stepped in a few times when things got tight. Co-signed his first car lease, floated him some cash when a business idea stalled. Nothing huge, just things you do for family. But over time, I started creating quiet boundaries. Not out of anger, just realism. He didn't have the same filter I did when it came to risk or consequences. We were never the type of brothers who talked every day, but I assumed there was still a basic level of trust. An unspoken rule that no matter how far he drifted, he wouldn't drag me with him. That assumption didn't just break. It vanished. The next morning, I walked into the bank branch listed on the loan agreement. I kept telling myself there had to be an error, maybe someone with a similar name, maybe some mix-up at their end. It was easier to imagine a clerical mistake than a personal betrayal. The loan officer met me with the kind of politeness reserved for people who might cause a scene. She walked me into a small glass office, offered me a seat, and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were scanned documents with my name at the top of every page. The first was a loan application. My full name, address, social security number, all correct. Attached were my pay stubs, 2 months of bank statements, and a letter of employment. Then came the signature line. My name was scribbled in thick blue ink, twice. It wasn't even. A good imitation. I didn't touch the folder. Just stared at it. She washed my face as I read, then spoke softly, as if volume might make things worse. These were submitted through an in-person application. The individual presented as your authorized agent. Did you verify that with me directly? I asked. She paused. Our records show that the representative submitted physical copies of ID and supporting documentation. We verified by phone. My stomach sank. What number? She tilted her screen. It wasn't mine, but it was familiar. Liam had used it as a backup line when we were splitting utility bills a year ago. I hadn't thought about it since that's when the denial broke. Last spring, Liam needed help applying for an apartment. He'd forgotten to build credit, so I gave him a few of my documents to include in the background check, just to ease things with the landlord. I told him to delete them after. He said he would. Of course he said he would. Back then, I saw it as a small favor, something older brothers do. I never imagined those same files would be used to take out tens of thousands in loans behind my back, and it wasn't just the forgery. It was the planning, the quiet access to my records, the manipulation of someone's trust, mine, just to buy more time on a life he couldn't control. Liam had known exactly what he was doing. He didn't panic and forge something out of desperation in the middle of the night. He walked into a bank, used my details, signed my name, and listed himself as my agent. That wasn't a mistake. That was a decision. I left the bank with a copy of everything they'd given me. No yelling. No threats. Just a heavy silence I couldn't shake. This wasn't identity theft by a stranger. It was identity theft by someone who knew exactly who I was and counted on the fact that I wouldn't fight back that I didn't call him that day. Or the day after. The impulse was there, of course it was. To confront, to demand answers, to lash out at the person who had crossed a line I didn't even think existed between us. But I didn't act on it. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. Anger is loud. But betrayal, when it comes from someone close, is quiet. It doesn't explode, it settles. And once it's there, it doesn't leave easily. It lingers in your chest. Just beneath the ribs, dull and constant. I spent that first night alone in my apartment, documents spread across the table, the loan agreement open like an autopsy report. I kept reading my own name, printed again and again like a stranger's mask. There was no panic, no chaos, just a strange kind of stillness, like I was watching someone else's life come undone. Memories came without asking. Liam asking to borrow my laptop when his broke. Liam showing up late to dinners, always with a story and a smile. Liam running out of options, then out of excuses. But I always gave him room to try again. That was my mistake. The silence between us wasn't just about the loan. It had been building for years. A slow erosion of trust I'd ignored because it was easier than naming it. Because admitting that your own brother might not respect your boundaries is harder than forgiving his mistakes. This wasn't just a moment of betrayal. It was the confirmation of a pattern. I didn't scream. I documented. I didn't threaten. I listened to the tone in his voice in my memories, to the signs I had ignored. And somewhere in that quiet, something shifted. I stopped reacting and started thinking if Liam had turned my name into his escape plan, he hadn't considered what I'd do once I stopped protecting him. The silence didn't last. It turned into structure. Within days, I had ordered full credit reports from all three major bureaus. I already knew about the $48,000 loan from the call, but there were more. Two others. One for $22,000, another for $21,500. Different banks, same address, same details, same forged signature. All taken out within a 6-week period. In total, just over $90,000 attached to my name. I went cold reading through the credit entries. Every one of them dated, filed, processed while I was at work, living my life, completely unaware my identity was being divided into installments. The first thing I did was freeze all further credit activity under my Social Security number. Then, I opened a fraud case with each lender, submitting scanned documentation and formal statements. I wasn't emotional. I was exact. If Liam had planned this like a system, I would dismantle it like one. The banks had internal fraud units, but their pace was slow. So I started building my own file. Names, timestamps, approval letters, contact numbers, everything that connected. The dots. I treated it like an audit, not just to clear my name, but to understand how deeply the breach went. There were patterns. Loan number 2 had been verified over a call. The voice used my full name, date of birth, even quoted my salary from a tax return I'd saved on my old laptop, the one Liam borrowed when his was acting up last year. I'd never thought to check what he copied. Why would I? I contacted Darren, a former colleague of mine who now worked in compliance at a telecom provider. We'd kept in touch off and on, mostly surface level, but I sent him a direct message asking for help. Not legal pressure, just a favor. I needed call metadata, dates, device IDs, IP logs. Just enough to see if my gut was right. He called me back 2 nights later. The verification call came from a VoIP app using your old number. The voice print? It's not a match to yours, but it's consistent across all 3 calls. I didn't have to ask. Liam had always been the only one who could imitate my speech patterns. Not perfectly, but enough for a distracted clerk to tick the approval box. The next step was documentation. I reached out to a forensic handwriting analyst, someone I'd worked with once in a corporate fraud case. We weren't close, but she remembered me. I emailed her the signatures and a few scanned copies of my actual forms for comparison. She sent back a preliminary analysis within 72 hours. Her note was brief. Signatures are inconsistent with your hand pressure and stroke patterns. 2 different hands, possibly traced. Strong basis for forgery claim. Every confirmation hit differently. Not with shock, but with a quiet nausea. Liam hadn't just gambled. He'd structured this. One bank would have been bad enough. 3 was intentional. There was something even worse than the financial risk, my reputation. If this got flagged in the wrong place, I could lose my audit license. Financial institutions don't separate fraud victim from compliance risk in neat categories. They just avoid both. I started keeping everything in a locked folder on a USB drive. Every bank call, every letter, screenshots of Liam's text history, timestamps of his location tags. There wasn't a single confrontation between us. He had no idea I knew, and maybe that was the hardest part. The confidence he must have had to assume I wouldn't look, that I'd stay quiet, that my restraint, my loyalty, my tendency to de-escalate would extend even to this point. One morning, I found an email in my inbox, a promotional ad from one of the loan providers addressed to me. It thanked me for being a valued customer. I stared at it for a long time before archiving it. There's something strange about betrayal carried out in silence. No arguments, no slammed doors, just digital paper trails, quietly executed in borrowed time. By the end of week 3, I knew everything. The loan amounts, the forged documents, the verification paths, the timestamps, and I knew exactly who was behind it. By the end of the 3rd week, I had enough documentation to fill a case file. And still, I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't text, didn't hint, didn't slip into old patterns of talking it out. I wasn't interested in another apology wrapped in deflection. I'd played that game too many times. Instead, I filed. The first was a formal fraud complaint with the Federal Credit Authority. Their process was slow, but thorough. I uploaded a detailed statement, itemized each loan with dates, flagged the forged signatures, and included expert verification reports, call logs, voice print inconsistencies, handwriting analysis, all attached. I labeled every file. I wanted clarity, not chaos. Then came the civil suit. I retained a local attorney who specialized in financial misconduct. We weren't friends. That helped. I gave her everything I had, explained the relationship quietly but without apology, and asked one question: can we freeze the funds before they move? She nodded. If we act quickly, yes. She filed for a temporary injunction to block any further withdrawal of the disbursed loan amounts, 2 of which hadn't even reached full release. We also submitted a request for forensic audit of the transaction records under the grounds of identity fraud. Everything was done quietly. No notice to Liam. No legal summons yet. Just groundwork. And that was the difference this time. I wasn't reacting emotionally. I wasn't acting like an older brother trying to fix a younger brother's mess. I was protecting my name. And this time, I wasn't conflicted about doing it through the legal system. Liam had always counted on the same cycle: damage, denial, delay, then forgiveness. It worked because I allowed it. Because I told myself family deserved second chances, even when the pattern was on its 5th or 6th repeat. But this wasn't a missed rent payment or an unpaid credit card. This was $90,000 tied to my name, and nearly a decade of credibility that could dissolve with one bank report that I kept him completely in the dark. As far as he knew, I hadn't figured anything out. Maybe he thought I was too passive to press charges. Maybe he thought I'd cover the damage to avoid embarrassment. And to be honest, for a moment, I almost did. But there's something about seeing your own signature forged deliberately, not sloppily, that strips the emotion out of the decision. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making him hurt. It was about preserving the one thing he thought I wouldn't fight for: my boundaries. Putting your own brother in front of a court filing isn't easy. But neither is pretending it didn't happen. The first notice hit his account in late March. A routine online login suddenly showed a frozen balance. Pending fraud investigation. Contact legal department. He must have assumed it was a glitch. That's how he worked. Blame the system first, delay the consequences. But by the time the second letter arrived, this time from the Federal Credit Authority, his voice had changed. The call came just after 8 p.m. on a Sunday. I recognized the number, but let it ring twice before answering. "Did you do this?" he asked. No introduction, no pretense. There was panic in his voice. Real panic, the kind that couldn't be spun into a joke or talked away. "I didn't do anything to you, Liam," I said evenly. "You did this to yourself." Silence. Then, a sharp breath, followed by an attempt at control. "I was going to fix it. You weren't supposed to overreact like this." That word stuck with me, overreact. As if preserving my identity, my credit, my name, was a dramatic move. As if his decision to impersonate me across 3 financial institutions was somehow a misunderstanding between brothers. I didn't overreact, I replied. I filed a report. I didn't hang up. I let the silence hold. When he finally disconnected, he didn't call back. 3 weeks later, we sat in the same courtroom. Different tables, same last name. He showed up with a public defender and a folder of mismatched documents. The signatures didn't match. The records were incomplete. He kept glancing at me during the proceedings, like he was trying to figure out how far I'd taken this. The answer? All the way. My lawyer walked the court through everything. Dates, documents, call logs, voice analysis, signature evaluations. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. The facts were concrete. Every element of the plan Liam had stitched together came undone with timestamps and expert reports that I watched him shrink as the evidence was laid out. Not physically, but in posture. The confidence he always wore like armor cracked with each exhibit admitted into the record. At 1 point, the judge asked him directly, "Did you impersonate your brother in order to secure these loans?" He paused, longer than he should have, then said, "I didn't mean for it to go that far." The courtroom didn't react. There was no drama, no gasps, just the scratch of a clerk's pen, a quiet acknowledgement that intent doesn't erase outcome. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. The loans were declared fraudulent. The banks were required to clear them from my name and pursue restitution from the responsible party. Liam, he wasn't sentenced to jail. It was his first major offense, and the judge gave him a suspended sentence. But the financial repercussions were severe. Court-ordered repayment, mandatory fraud education program, 7-year bar from opening or co-signing any new credit accounts. And perhaps the part that struck him hardest, his future prospects now carried a flag. Every application, every background check, every job interview with a financial disclosure requirement. He'd have to explain this. He didn't look at me on the way out, just gathered his papers and walked past with a hollow sort of focus. Not shame. Exactly. More like someone who couldn't believe the system had actually responded. He never thought I'd follow through. He thought I'd yell, maybe threaten, but ultimately back down. That had always been our pattern. He pushed, I pulled away. He spun lies, I looked the other way. But this time, I'd responded with something far more unfamiliar to him. Boundaries enforced by process. No emotion, no performance, just consequences. There was no satisfaction watching him leave the courtroom. No cinematic sense of justice. Just a quiet realization that, for once, I'd chosen to protect myself over protecting the illusion of family. And it felt steady, not triumphant, but steady. A year has passed since the court ruling. I haven't heard from Liam, and I doubt I will. There was no final message, no apology, not even a passive-aggressive email. Just silence, the kind that settles when someone realizes they've run out of ways to rewrite the story. And honestly, I prefer it that way. We both understand what happened. There's nothing left to say that wouldn't feel like performance. The banks cleared my records within 3 months. I had to pay out a small processing fee just to expedite some of the clearances. It wasn't fair, but it was faster. I treated it like a cleanup cost, a closing chapter fee for a mess I didn't create. The court ruled that Liam owed the full amount, and the repayment plan was structured through wage garnishment. Whether he's sticking to it or not, I stopped checking. The damage to my name didn't linger the way I feared. My credit rebounded. My reputation at work remained intact. The only thing that truly changed was me, and not in some grand, cinematic way. Just in how I think about loyalty, about access, about what I allow and what I don't justify anymore. People sometimes ask if I've forgiven him, and I don't really know how to answer that. I've moved on. I'm not angry, not the way I was in those first few days. But trust? That's a debt that doesn't expire with time. You either pay it back in actions or you don't. And Liam hasn't. What I've come to accept is that not all debts are financial. Some are moral. Some are the kind you carry quietly, not because you want revenge, but because the weight reminds you of what you won't tolerate again. I live more carefully now. Not paranoid, just aware. I keep records. I ask more questions. I don't ignore the small signals when something feels off. But I haven't turned bitter. Just sharper. There's a kind of peace that comes with not needing things to be repaired. I don't need an apology to move forward. I don't need reconciliation to sleep at night. Sometimes clarity is enough. To anyone watching this who's quietly carrying the weight of a betrayal, especially from someone close, listen to that silence. The way it sits in your chest, the way your gut keeps circling back to something that doesn't feel right. That instinct, it's rarely wrong. You don't need permission to protect yourself. And you don't need guilt to stop you. Some lessons cost you money. Others cost you a version of someone you thought you knew. But if you're lucky, what you gain in return is stronger than both.